The Dogman legend is very popular across Michigan, but some people may not know it all started as a prank.
From an eerie stillness deep in the woods to a chilling sound cutting through the dead of night outside a remote cabin, this is how a hunter recorded what may be the most disturbing Michigan Dogman encounter ever caught on a trail cam. Sometimes we hear stories that feel too strange to accept. Sometimes it's a run-in with the legendary Bigfoot. Other times it's a glimpse of something supernatural or unexplained. What usually makes these stories hard to believe is the same problem every time. There's never real proof. Until now. Because today, that changes. Today, we're looking at evidence of something genuinely unsettling. Thanks to a single trail camera, we have footage connected to what John Alden, a Michigan local, claims he experienced while traveling through the wilderness. So buckle in as we follow this unsettling path and uncover something truly wild and deeply disturbing. John Alden and his deep connection to the creatures of the forest. What makes this strange and unsettling story even harder to dismiss is who our witness actually is. John Alden isn't just some random guy wandering through the Michigan woods. He's a seasoned outdoorsman, someone known for pushing into places most people wouldn't dare explore. Over time, he's built a reputation around his curiosity and appetite for adventure, always eager to go where others won't.
Can you just walk us through it? Tell us from the beginning what happened that day.
I was picking up a load, and as I was coming back, there was an air leak that I had, so I pulled in here.
On one particular journey into the forest, John unknowingly crossed that thin, unsettling line between everyday reality and the kind of things most people only associate with imagination. In an interview, he explained that his deep connection to the outdoors began early in life. He started camping and exploring these woods as a child, and because of that, he grew into an experienced hiker with an intimate understanding of Michigan's wilderness. That experience would matter more than he ever expected on one unforgettable night. That evening, nothing unusual was planned. John was simply enjoying a calm night, unwinding at his cabin tucked far into the thick Michigan forest. His goal, as always, was to relax and feel connected to nature. But once the sun set, that sense of peace vanished. He described a strange, heavy feeling settling over the area, something he couldn't explain. In later interviews, John said the shift was so subtle and unnatural that it permanently changed him. He had been to this cabin hundreds of times before and always considered it the perfect place to observe wildlife. Most nights were routine. He would spend time fishing, watching deer, or simply listening to the forest before heading inside. But that night was different. The moment he noticed how off everything felt, he became uneasy. What disturbed him most wasn't a sound, but the lack of one. The forest was completely silent. No crickets, no coyotes, not even the distant hoot of an owl, something he often heard on quiet nights. Instead, there was nothing at all. A silence so deep it felt like you could hear a pin drop. And that, John said, was the most unsettling part of all.
I was approached by something that cast a shadow. The moon was just coming up, was almost a full moon.
John tried to brush the feeling aside, chalking the unease up to a couple of beers or maybe the odd shift in the weather. He told himself he was overthinking it and carried on as usual. That routine included setting up a trail camera, something he'd done many times before. It wasn't unusual at all. In fact, John regularly placed trail cams throughout the area. At the time, this was just one of several cameras he had spread around the woods. He enjoyed reviewing the footage later, watching forest animals move through the trees under the cover of darkness. This particular camera, however, was brand new. John explained that it wasn't just new, it was equipped with night vision. Because of that, he believed it would be perfect for capturing nighttime activity. He decided to place it fairly close to his cabin, expecting nothing more than the usual deer, raccoons, or maybe a curious coyote. There was no sense of anticipation, no thought that anything unusual might appear. What John didn't realize was that this simple decision, setting up that one trail cam on an otherwise ordinary night, would end up altering his life completely. It would challenge everything he thought he understood about the forest surrounding his cabin and turn a familiar place into something far more unsettling. an encounter unlike anything else. Unusual things began happening as the sun dipped below the horizon. At around 9 p.m., John became aware that the air around him was completely still and unnervingly quiet. Even with that strange sensation hanging over him, John finished setting up the trail camera before making his way back to the cabin. He assumed that, at most, he'd capture some routine nighttime footage of animals roaming the woods while people slept. He had no idea how wrong that assumption would turn out to be. Afterward, John headed back to the cabin and prepared himself a meal. But as the evening went on, an overwhelming sense of unease settled in. Truth be told, it felt like that tension had been building for a while. Even inside the cabin, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The forest itself felt empty, as if the wildlife had vanished. There wasn't a single chirp, no rustling in the distance, not a living thing making a sound. John tried to push the feeling aside, telling himself the animals had likely moved to another area of the woods. Once he finished eating, he decided to call it a night. That decision, however, proved far easier to make than to follow through on. The silence outside was oppressive, almost suffocating. Eventually, the stillness shattered. John's uneasy sleep was abruptly interrupted by a sound unlike anything he had ever heard before. And that's saying something for a man who had spent a significant portion of his life exploring these woods. According to John, the noise was so deeply unsettling that even recounting it during the interview sent chills down his spine. He described it as starting out as a faint growl, but not one he could associate with any known animal. This growl was deeper, heavier, more guttural than anything he'd encountered before. And once that sound emerged, it immediately commanded attention, pulling him fully awake and alert.
After the song came out, it started to generate so much interest. They would come in waves from people saying that this creature is real, and we know it's real because we have evidence of it.
The sound began as a deep, rumbling murmur, but it didn't stay that way for long. Slowly it transformed, climbing higher and higher until it became a piercing, ear-splitting scream. It felt as if some kind of banshee was loose out there, howling into the empty night. The noise was raw, savage, and deeply unnatural, the kind of sound that brands itself into your memory forever. For John, it was something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. As you'd expect, fear took hold of him almost instantly. His body locked up as his mind raced. What in the world could produce a sound like that? John had already made it clear that he'd never heard anything even remotely similar before. And that says a lot for someone who had spent so much of his life wandering these woods. This place was practically a second home to him. Shaking with fear, John tried to steady himself. His first instinct was to make sense of it, to force logic into the situation. It had to be an animal, right? Something out there he just hadn't encountered yet. Maybe a wolverine native to Michigan. Maybe even a panther. Those explanations felt reasonable enough, at least on the surface. But none of that explained why the sound felt so wrong, so foreign, almost alien to him. As he struggled to process what was happening, the situation took an even darker turn. John realized the noise wasn't staying put. It was getting closer. Close enough that it felt like the vibrations were passing straight through the walls of the cabin. That's when panic truly set in. What was happening out there? Terrified beyond reason, John's thoughts spiraled as he desperately ran through every possibility of what could be approaching. Maybe it was some kind of sick prank, someone messing with him for laughs. But if that were the case, it stopped being funny a long time ago. Those thoughts quickly gave way to something worse. What if someone out there was hurt? What if someone needed help, possibly even his help? The realization hit hard, because that would mean stepping outside. And the idea of facing whatever was making that sound filled him with dread. He knew, deep down, that whatever it was felt far too powerful, far too primal for him to handle. One thing was certain in his mind. Whatever was out there, it wasn't human. With thoughts like that pounding through his head, it's no surprise John felt like he was on the verge of losing it. He later said his heart was beating so violently he could hear it competing with the screams outside. Sweat soaked through him as fear took complete control. Frozen in place, John likely wished he had never come out here that night. Somehow, though, he managed to pull himself together just enough to make a break for it. He knew one thing for sure. He wasn't the hunter here. He was the one standing in something else's territory, and as he tried to escape, he was about to witness something so shocking that John would later say nothing in his life could have prepared him for what he was about to see. What in the world was that? John knew he had no choice but to act if he wanted out. Nearly frozen by fear, his body felt heavy as the unsettling sound crept closer each second. Deep down, he knew his life could be in danger. With that in mind, he slowly slipped out of bed, careful with every movement, doing everything he could to stay silent as he moved through the cabin. The darkness made it hard to see, but the moon brought slight relief. Its pale glow spilled across the forest, revealing faint shapes beyond the trees. In that dim light, shadows shifted between the trunks as John scanned the woods for any sign of what might be there. For a moment, it seemed like nothing would appear. Then something moved. A sudden, unmistakable motion caught his eye. A figure shifted in the darkness, and even without seeing it clearly, the sight sent a sharp jolt of fear through him.
A wolf head staring at you.
Staring at me, keeping up with me. I'm at about 20 miles an hour.
What are the chances here that this is a bear or a wolf that jumped onto the side of your truck and was essentially trying to get in?
There's no chance of that. He was running next to me on two legs.
On two legs?
The realization finally set in, and it was just as unsettling as everything that had led up to it. There was no doubt anymore. Something was out there in the woods. Thinking back on that moment, John remembered the figure moving through the shadows. Something large, something that felt hostile and aggressive just by its presence. What made the situation even more disturbing was when a sudden flash of light cut through the darkness, giving John a brief but clear look into the eyes of whatever was lurking out there. What he saw stopped him cold. According to John, the creature standing before him was unlike anything he had ever encountered in his life. It appeared to be walking on two legs, but that alone wasn't what shook him most. The thing was massive, towering, taller than any man John had ever seen. That realization alone was terrifying, but it didn't end there. The creature's body was covered in thick, matted fur, giving it a wild, almost primal appearance. Even more unsettling were its eyes. They locked onto him from the darkness, unblinking and intense. Despite the poor lighting, John felt completely exposed, frozen under its stare. This wasn't fear brought on by imagination alone. To this day, John insists that what he saw was no bear, no wolf, and nothing he could explain away. In that moment, fear mixed with a strange sense of awe as the creature suddenly stopped moving. It lifted its head, seemingly sniffing the air, and its sheer size and presence caused John to freeze even more. He didn't dare move. Drawing its attention felt like a risk he couldn't afford to take. He had no idea what would happen if it noticed him. Thankfully, staying perfectly still seemed to work, at least for the moment.
What stood out was white, and I saw the white focused, and it was teeth. Large canine teeth. And it had massive jaws. I could really see just how massive the animal actually was.
Instead of turning its attention toward the terrified John, the creature simply lost interest and drifted back into the darkness after taking in the night air. John stood there, trembling, barely able to breathe, watching as the massive figure disappeared into the wilderness. What was it? And how did something like that end up out there? When it finally vanished from sight, John let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. But the relief was only partial, because even as it moved away, that deep, guttural growl could still be heard echoing through the trees. Whatever it was unlike anything he had ever encountered. After an experience like that, it's no surprise John says he will never forget what the creature looked like. When describing its face later on, he admitted it made him uneasy just thinking about it. The face seemed both human and not human at the same time. According to John, it had a wide forehead and something resembling a snout, but not like a bear's or a wolf's. Instead, it was disturbingly close to a human nose, just distorted enough to feel wrong. Combined with a powerful jawline and sharp teeth visible in its mouth, the creature looked incredibly intimidating. Still, the feature that haunted John the most was its eyes. They glowed faintly beneath heavy, prominent brows, eerie and intense, similar to the way a cat's eyes catch the light in the dark. But what truly unsettled him was that these didn't feel like the eyes of a wild animal. There was something else there, a level of awareness, intelligence, as if the creature understood more than John expected it to. Its face may have looked savage and primal, but those eyes told a different story entirely. Even now, John says the memory of them is burned into his mind. Fascinating, terrifying, and unforgettable. Perhaps that's because he had never, in all his years, seen anything even remotely like it.
From the fire pit, you can look up the hill that goes to that tree line, and I feel like at night, like there is something watching you. I always felt like their eyes just locked onto you from up there.
Whether in real life, on television, or even in books, John had never encountered anything remotely like this creature before. It felt so alien to him, so completely out of place, that it seemed like some kind of anomaly, a rare wild presence pulled straight from the deepest parts of the forest. To John, the encounter challenged everything he thought he understood about nature and what was supposed to exist out there. The creature appeared so unreal that John says he's eternally thankful the moment was captured on his trail cam, because without that footage, who would ever believe he crossed paths with something like that in the wilderness? It's a reminder of how strange the world truly is, and how we can never be fully certain about what might be lurking beyond the tree line. Creature caught on camera. Speaking of that footage, let's break down exactly how the encounter unfolded. As the video plays, we can watch the creature slowly and deliberately step out of the darkness at roughly 1:34 a.m. When you use the surrounding trees for scale, its size becomes immediately obvious. It's enormous, nearly matching the height of some of the trees, and possibly even taller. This is largely because it appears to be standing upright on two legs. And it's not just tall either. The creature is clearly massive, with a visibly muscular build. Even though it's covered in thick, dark fur, its powerful frame is impossible to miss. Watch closely as it pauses and sniffs the air. In that instant, the moonlight catches its intense eye. That's when we see the eerie glow in the creature's strange eyes, the exact moment that left John deeply unsettled by what stood before him. John later admitted that this single moment still haunts him every time he goes back and watches the footage. The encounter is as chilling as it is brief. We can see the creature vanish back into the shadows just as quickly as it emerged. The camera continues recording for a while longer, but the figure never appears again. The scene is so unbelievable that it naturally leads to the question of whether John ever returned to the cabin. When asked, John openly admitted that the entire experience shook him to his core, and understandably so. How do you even begin to recover after being so close to something that imposing and unknown? As terrifying as the situation was, John also confessed that he feels a strange fascination with it. After all, how do you explain an experienced outdoorsman who is now too afraid to return to his own cabin in the woods? That cabin was once a place of peace, a refuge where he found comfort in solitude. Now, it represents a moment of trauma from his past. What makes this even more interesting is that this wasn't the only dangerous or frightening situation John had faced in his life. He'd gone on hunts in complete darkness before, unable to see anything at all. Yet none of those moments frightened him the way this encounter did. That being said, John hasn't lost his respect or love for nature. He understands that the wilderness can throw unexpected curveballs, showing us things we may never fully understand because they feel so foreign to us. That's simply part of nature. With that in mind, John explained that although he hasn't returned since the encounter, he does plan on making a long overdue trip back to his cabin. He can't ignore his connection to the wilderness forever, not because of one strange creature in the woods. In fact, he believes the experience helped him appreciate nature even more. Sure, It's full of surprises, and we don't always know what's out there, but that just means there's still so much left to discover.
And isn't that exciting to think about?
Still, John plans to take extra precautions now that he's more aware of what might be lurking in the darkness. Once he feels prepared and respectful of whatever lives out there, he intends to return and reclaim the solitude his cabin once gave him. John also mentioned that he plans to set up even more trail cameras when he goes back. Wouldn't it be incredible to capture more footage of this strange creature? Who knows? There could even be more of them out there. Either way, John won't be going back to hunt anything. He'll be returning simply to experience nature again. And maybe, just maybe, that journey could lead to another encounter with the creature, or something like it. In the end, this remains a fascinating glimpse into the blurred line between fantasy and reality. Perhaps one day we'll learn more about what this outdoorsman encountered in the Michigan wilderness. From an eerie silence in the woods to a terrifying sound echoing through the night outside a remote cabin. This is how one hunter captured what may be the creepiest Michigan Dogman encounter ever recorded on a trail cam.